Okay, my name is Abi. I'm from True Legal, an online magazine, and I work with Colin Jeffries Incorporated at Tennis too. Thank you, sir, for having us in your office to have this important interview. Can you introduce yourself to our readers, please?
Good day. The name is Hishaam Mohamed. I'm I'm from Cape Town, at a place called coming from a place called Lotus River, which is in the south of the Cape metropolitan area. I work for the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, which is a national department that manages the criminal justice system and the civil justice system in South Africa. I'm based in Cape Town as the provincial coordinator for the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development.
By the hierarchy of your position, will I be right to say you are the head of the judiciary in the Western Cape?
No, I'm the head of the Department of Justice
Okay.
that is responsible for the administration of justice at all our courts in the Western Cape.
Okay. So, you are an advocate. Can we talk a little about your educational background? Maybe from where you started, maybe whatever, as far back as you can remember. You can tell us a little background about that.
No, I matriculated in Wynberg, also in the southern suburbs of the Cape metropolitan area. After I matriculated in 1985, I went back to school in 1986 to redo my matric. Although I passed the first time, it was only a secondary pass because we wrote under the emergency regulations at the time, under Army Guard, the state of emergency that was declared by the apartheid regime at the time. I therefore went back in 1986 to get a better pass at school so that I could study law at the University of the Left, called the University of the Western Cape.
Okay, so from when you matriculated, then you went to the University of Western Cape. How many years did you study to get your LLB, or what qualification did you get first before the LLB?
I studied B. Juris, which is an undergraduate law degree. Thereafter, I studied LLB, which is postgraduate at the time. I then went to work, but also studied part-time for a Master of Public Administration here in Johannesburg and in UWC. Thereafter, I attended a senior executive course at Boston Business School in the United States.
Okay, well, can you give us a little background to where you have worked, where you started your working career?
Well, I started to work after graduating to work in the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, first as a clerk of the court. Thereafter, I managed the Family Advocate's Office that deals with care of minor children. And thereafter, in 1997, I was appointed as the provincial head in the Western Cape for the Department of Justice. And I've been here ever since, meaning that was the only work I've done formally. Before that, of course, I was assisting in the research during the Kempton Park negotiations for a new constitutional dispensation in South Africa. That was from 1990 to 1992, assisting the late Professor Kada Asmal and his team in the Constitutional Committee of the ANC in doing research on, particularly my area was concentrating on electoral systems for the future South Africa. We, of course, ended up with a list system as we have it.
So now that you've mentioned what you contributed to the constitutional development in South Africa, maybe we can go a little backward to how did you get involved into the ANC and the struggle? Maybe you can give us a little background, how you got into it.
Well, the struggle for freedom and democracy has been a lifelong struggle by many thousands of compatriots and activists and persons and people. My journey started with, ironically, with the sports in our schools at the time. I'm a rugby nut, still am. Love the game of rugby. And it came already early on at high school, at grade 8 already, that we could not play with white schools or could not get matches in 1986, 87. or rather 1980, yeah, in 1986 too. Uh, that was for me a situation which we had to endure, which we call no normal sport in abnormal society, and fighting uh, the the separation of sports at the time was my first political awakening. I therefore got involved and led a march against the system of apartheid while at school, um, which of course led also to the 1985 tricameral system that we opposed in the streets. And I was then at that time arrested for 2 weeks, which was another political awakening when we fought against the tricameral system during the emergency of September 1985. That, by the way, caused me to rewrite my matriculation, although I passed, but not enough to enter university.
So how old were you when you were arrested the first time?
First time I was 18 years old, uh, going to matric at that time, yeah.
And this was in the colored township, where people have this perception that during the struggle, the colored kind of have it a little better than the traditional blacks. What do you say about that? How come like there was struggle even among the colored?
Well, let me say historically, uh, even before the UDF, back in 1980, when I led my first march at primary school, being a standard 5 at the time, called grade 6, uh, there was always, the struggle was always an integrated struggle of all communities uh, across the different cultures, religion. We knew we were fighting what we have in the Freedom Charter uh, for the principles that's contained in our Freedom Charter for non-racialism, non-sexism, in a democratic South Africa. So we would have activists getting together either in the township in Guguletu or in Lotus River from where I come from. And later also the same happened at university, at UWC, that is University of Western Cape. Now, the integration, or rather the struggle, as I said, was for everybody that believed in democracy, that wanted to end apartheid, which was a crime against humanity as declared by the United Nations at that time.
Okay, so what would you think is responsible for the polarization or the division between colored and black in the Western Cape at the moment, compared to the unity you're talking about that used to exist then when you people were struggling against apartheid? Or is it because there's no common enemy to focus now?
Well, firstly, let me say the so-called colored community in the Western Cape in particular has a history of struggle. At the same time, we also, the early history of preferential treatment by the apartheid regime of dividing communities by providing certain privileges to certain communities. Hence the tricameral system we had, hence the opposing the tricameral system, because that was apartheid on a grand scale, affecting fundamental rights of people. But I think firstly that solidarity between colored, white, Indians, African people that, that led the struggle through young children, or rather the youth of 1985, the generation I come from, 1980, 1985, is still there. But I think um, uh, the motivation is different now. And correctly so, we in a modern world, there's the struggle for economic emancipation, for economic freedom that still have to be attained in many instances, in particular in this area called the Western Cape Province, which is an integral part of South Africa, although to many or some think that this is a republic on its own. And we want to end that. We are a unitary state. We have one constitution that so many died for. Many millions have participated during the Constituent Assembly process of constitution making, and our communities, including the community where I come from, actively participated in drafting our new constitution to the consultative process that took place. in the early 90s. Now, it's not a matter of colored people, so-called colored people, not being identified or being progressive or perceived not being progressive. In fact, I would argue very much so. Some of the major, most progressive ideas in the struggle came from the Western Cape in particular, challenging within the broader MDM movement some of the practices that we needed our own discipline on.
So, sitting here now, I can see the why you are on this seat is because of education. Now, what will you say to a young child in South Africa who is in Mitchell's Plain or Kukuletu or Kailicha who look up to you and say, okay, you are like an exception. There are a lot of black people, that's it, I'm talking of colored white Indian, who have degrees like you, but they can't find employment. What would you say to those ones who say that?
Freedom, as we learn, comes through struggle, and the struggle continues. A rights culture only comes if it's deeply rooted in our conscience. And what I mean by that, we need to actively continue with what we call perseverance, honesty, and hard work and commitment. Today's struggle, although more complicated than yesterday, the fundamentals are the same. Right? So, honesty, we can't have any corruption or any form. It starts with ourselves. When we lead people, we know that we need to also trust people, and vice versa. And so we're saying, I would argue that success, although it comes through hard work, it also comes through perseverance. And we've got to ensure that we continue in struggling for access to education in all of its form and levels that it is, whether you attend a university or a FET college. It's an empowering tool, notwithstanding. Whether you do a menial job or whether you do a middle management job at the outset of your employment, starting to be employed, doesn't matter. It's not how much you earn at the start. It's whether you are able to give a contribution to society. The rest is all bonus. Whether you then move up the economic ladder in terms of your performance, all depends on yourself. But those who are leading, myself in my own area of work, we need to lead by example. Meaning, we've got to encourage even those you work with to ensure that they do get qualifications, they do get opportunities to educate. There are many people in the Western Cape, particularly in the working class areas, that is simply not by the means to take that particular endeavor to educate themselves because of other problems, social, economic problems, the issue of access to funds to learn, the issue of having to look after your children, issue of safety and security. But notwithstanding that, I can say I'm one person who was determined to not initially having a bursary to study. I come from a very humble area called Lotus River. My father was a corner shopkeeper who didn't earn much with 7 children. And I had to work during holidays at various stores or selling shoes at the station to be able to come through the first year. It's only later, through the third year, that I got a bursary from South African Race Relations. I'm the one who hiked the whole first year for more than 35, 40 kilometers to the university, right, to be able to and to return through hiking, what we call hiking on the road, taking the strain for more than 2 years.
So you will encourage the younger ones to study, that it doesn't matter what's happening now, if they get themselves prepared, possibly with the hope that we have freedom now, South Africa can only get better. So if they get prepared, they have the advantage.
The opportunities are vast, the quantities are vast, however. The needs are greater because we're catering for a democratic country with about 50, just over 50 million people. And the youth is the majority of them. And so It is important. I think our policies are very clear. A large amount of our budget of the country goes into education, primary education, as well as secondary and higher education. And I think we are on the right path. Could, uh, but I think our psyche needs a bit of injection in terms of the struggle was to empower. We must never forget that. Many of our leaders who led, sometimes from outside the country in exile, made sure that they also got educated. And I think that's very important. And we believe in the modern world that is the key to greater economic freedom.
As the head of the judiciary in the Western Cape, or head of the Department of Justice, what are some of the programs that you do? For instance, I don't know if this falls within your domain. I know a lot of young, will I say, school leavers, like with LLB, young law graduates, they find it hard to get articles or where to learn their careers. Are there some programs that you run within your department that can help people, and how can they have access to this? And what are some of the successes in what are those some of those things you're doing to help the youth in the Western Cape?
Yeah, there's a number of programs, of course, to ensure there's access to justice, but in this particular instance, for students who graduate to have access to the articles, the Department of Justice itself has such a program of annual intake. In fact, as we speak now, there's an intake just been finalized now for graduates, but it's never enough. It has to do, and it can only grow, but it also has to do more than just the programs we run, because the state alone would not be able to completely transform the legal practice we have. We have just, for example, we will need the practitioners in the legal profession themselves to accelerate transformation. For example, we are now taking through Parliament the Legal Practice Bill, which has just been approved by the National Assembly, will now go to the National Council of Provinces, the second house, during this quarter of this 2014 year. And that will transform completely, fundamentally, the way law is being practiced in South Africa. One issue, for example, is we have a split legal system where we have attorneys and we have advocates. Many of these, the system we have has been inherited through the Roman Dutch law history, but more also through practices that is now completely outdated. We have a person in the street having to force to debrief an attorney before they could have the services of an advocate, and that in itself has challenges for cost in itself. And the legal practice bill goes so far in a way to take away, to have a single judicial system or legal system in South Africa. And we're hoping through the legal practice bill that it will eventually mitigate the issue of cost as one of the fundamental impediment of access to justice in South Africa today. Then, of course, the law graduates, coming back to the law graduates, we believe that, I believe rather, that the access is quite skewed at the moment, depending on, especially in the Western Cape, in this part of the world, where we have a bar council that has not been completely active in ensuring that graduates get opportunity for privilege, and as well as the law society, and we are in continuous discussion with these councils. In terms of the new law, we will have one council that will adjudicate in the affairs of the legal profession in South Africa, which we hope over the next 3 years will take us quite far, which will eradicate centuries, or rather many decades of practice, negative practice that does not promote access to justice.
So, but at the moment, does your office have authority to question the bar society? Like what I found out is in a year they're like 25 to 30 white pupillage candidates, and they're like maybe 5 or 10 who are colored Indian blacks. Is there any way of accounting for this? Can
No,
they tell reasons why they are graduates who are of Indian blacks and colored, and they are not taking, and the law society too? What are they doing to that, and do they?
Well, statutory we don't have the authority, but currently, hence the new law they've been introducing. And the new council will certainly have that, because it will collapse the bar councils in the whole of South Africa, as well as the sidebar, which is the law societies, into one council. that will be appointed and approved by the Minister of Justice, but with a fair degree of maintaining some form of independence, and therefore the legal profession will have an opportunity to have representation largely on this council, but with complete different objectives in terms of transformation of the legal profession. Cost is one aspect I mentioned, and there are many other access to justice factors.
How would the lawyers be addressed? Will they still be advocate attorneys, or will it just be attorneys or barristers or lawyers? I mean, under the new bill?
Yeah, no, they will be barristers being able to practice
across the board to appear in all courts.
Yes, already there is some. We have rules to that effect, but the separation is still there. There are certain subject to certain conditions and time frames that an attorney could appear in the High Court at the moment too. But we will flatten out the process.
So what is your office doing to promote access for women into justice in the Western Cape? Because I'm focused in the Western Cape because you're the head of the Western Cape. So every question I ask him to come, what is your office doing to improve women access to justice in the Western Cape?
Access to justice, as I said, is access to the legal profession, but more importantly perhaps even is access for those who are most vulnerable in our society, from the aged to women, children, etc. Now, a number of programs we have, of course. Just now in August, a few months ago, we in the Western Cape had 15 public participation programs where we went out, and particularly in the rural areas, to inform our women and children of their rights and responsibilities, and also had a number of training workshops to community leaders on how to access these rights to assist people. We also funding 20 legal advice centers, community legal advice centers, through the Foundation for Human Rights, funded through the European Union in this province. We have also have a number of programs related to specific areas, such as maintenance, private maintenance. We are running a program called Operation Isonlo, which has the objective of tracing and locating defaulters, maintenance defaulters who refuse to pay and comply with court orders. We have been quite successful to that effect. Just the other day, a few weeks ago, we arrested, in this instance, 2 defaulters who owes more than 160,000 each. But we believe the civil remedies, those who can afford, who do not pay, that we give effect to the Maintenance Act to ensure that we contribute to alleviation of poverty and act in the best interest of my children.
15 hours.
What is more important also when it comes to abuse against women, we have this month, end of February, we'll be rolling out more sexual offences court that is specially equipped to deal with secondary trauma. When witnesses appear, they should be separated from the accused in particular, and the infrastructural design has been modernized to take into account the secondary trauma that women who are either raped or appear at court traumatized are being catered for, so that our justice infrastructure is also sensitive to the experience of many vulnerable groups and those who have undergone a bad experience in society. We of course have annual programs. We also operate in a cluster called the Justice Crime Prevention and Security Cluster.
Is that like a law clinic?
That is the departments in the
Okay.
criminal justice system. It consists of the police department, home affairs, social development, justice, the NPA, National Prosecuting Authority, all coming together in a cohesive way, jointly running these programs of access to justice rather than individually as we have been operating so far. We find a collective way of doing, such as running a Women's Month program or 16 days of activism of no violence against women and children that we just had in December, very successful. We were able to, in fact, be more effective. And it also gives an opportunity for communities to respond to our performance and the measures that we critically analyze whether we measuring up to the expectations. We, for example, reached just over 23,000 people during the month of August in 16 days of activism in December, in going out to communities annually. We'd like to do that whole year. That's not always possible from a budget perspective, but we have placed structures in the communities such as the Community Safety Forum, where all these same departments come together at the local district level to ensure that there's a liaison with our communities. That is quite new, just a year or two old, and we believe once we have stabilized the structures, that there will be more meaningful interaction between the justice system and communities at the local level.
So you regulate here the magistrates and the judges from the magistrate court, the district court to regional court and all that. Are they under your office?
Well, we manage all the administration of justice in the province of the courts. We service the magistrates as far as the tools of trade is concerned, as well as judges in the province. Magistrates and judges, of course, in terms of the decisions in court, are independent. They decide matters, adjudicate over matters without fear or favor, and of course they are answerable not to the executive, but they give effect to the constitution of the country, and so we respect that independence very much. But we are there in terms of our constitution, in terms of 161, 64, it's 5, to empower, to enable our judiciary to dispense justice to the community independently through our courts.
So do you have a say as to who is appointed? If the answer is yes, are you happy with the demographics of the magistrate, the judges, compared to the population, the way the population, I mean, from the disadvantaged and advantaged backgrounds, being that white people are more represented and women and the blacks were still lacking behind?
Well, I make decisions with regard to the appointments of all administrative personnel and managers that manage the courts in the province. I don't have a direct say in the appointment of the judges and magistrates. However, the Minister of Justice has the delegation in terms of the law to appoint magistrates and judges through various mechanisms. In the case of magistrates, the recommendation to the minister comes via the Magistrates Commission, which interviews magistrates, and recommends. The minister makes a decision. In the case of judges, the Judicial Service Commission of South Africa interviews and recommends to the president. The president appoints judges, of course. And so, of course, when it comes to patterns in terms of the demographics and the needs of each area, the department, we do have a say to that in terms of targets, yes.
So, what would you say, maybe a general message to the youth of South Africa, Western Cape particularly, now that we're going into election time? A lot of people are disillusioned, they don't want to vote at all. So I know it's a difficult question, being that you're not actively in politics, by virtue of your office. Maybe there's something you could say to people.
Well, let me say, we all have political conviction, we all have political history and interest in future of our country, in our democracy, and especially when we lead, we're going to lead actively. So yes, I have very strong political views. Professionally, of course, in my workplace, I do apply the fair justice approach, making sure that we serve all people. It does not mean the fact that I serve the majority part, or I support the majority party, that I should not help and assist minority or other views. Professionally, we serve everybody without favor. Now, in terms of your question about the election, if you can just repeat that.
Yeah, so maybe a general, maybe encouragement to people to go out there, to vote, whatever.
Okay. No, we have an obligation in South Africa. We are a young democracy despite 20 years. To some it's some time, to others it's very short. For me it's short. Time flies. But we've got so much to do. And especially preparing our children and future generation for the modern world, which will not wait for us. There's an expectation for us globally to be competitive, and the time and the basis has been laid by our foundation, being the Constitution and the democracy, and the journey we have traveled with the help of many stalwarts such as the late Nelson Mandela, and many Oliver Tambo and many others who fought for our liberation, and many compatriots unknown who have died for our struggle. We owe it to them to make sure that we give effect to our constitutional democracy. One of the fundamentals of democracy is, of course, the right to vote, for which we fought so hard and to express our views and feelings through the ballot paper. That's a vibrant democracy. And in the case of South Africa, the first time when I voted in 1994 was a very, like too many other thousands, was very emotional. Uh, my cousin, same age at the time, who was not necessarily involved in the struggle, but who voted also for the first time, was less emotional maybe, but also something new. Wanted to know why is there tears in my eyes, and for those tears, that which it represented, as expressed by many thousands, we owe it to ourselves. Now, as I said, it's for our future, and therefore I would encourage people to vote. Firstly, in the Western Cape in particular, we have a very great history of opposing undemocratic patterns of tricameral systems, divide and seek apartheid way of practices that we must make sure never happens again, as Tata Madiba encouraged us. And so I would encourage young people in particular and the old to come out and make use and be participants in our democracy.
On a personal note, if you don't mind, are you married and you have a family like kids and all?
Yes, I'm married. I've got 3 children. One is the first year university, is this year. And my daughter is 12 years old, and my youngest son is 9 years old.
So how do you balance your professional life with your private life? Are they supportive, or do they feel sometimes that is always a way because of your work?
Yeah, it's been a challenge, but we have mastered the balance over the last few years, but still not mastered, let me say, attempted, still a journey to perfection. We have to make time. I always say to staff, if you have work after hours, don't intrude on the family time. When they go sleep, then you do your after hours work. Don't do your after hours work, and then when they go sleep, then you feel guilty. And so in my case, I do all work I take home every night. That work starts after 10 into the early hours of the morning, and not before, because when I reach home at 7, 8, it would be the family time. However, and that's very important, because I believe that investing in your family is critical if you are to be a change agent for the community. So we have to keep the balance. But the reality also, where we lose out, this whole week I was not able to spend with my family because of work in other social responsibility. But that needs to be made up, and never miss out on opportunity to make up for the time, because you will never catch that time again. As we know, we all grow older, so does our children grow older, and we'll never catch that moment.
So maybe a final word for your staff, people in the Western Cape, or what? We've come to the end of the interview. Just a final word from you to encourage people maybe to study, to not to give up in life. Women, men to respect women, to anything generally, just to improve the relationship between men and women, because that's what true legal is all about.
Firstly, we should, let me say, practice what we preach. We must strive. We're not all perfect, but we strive in a continuous struggle way to ensure that we are fair to ourselves and fair to others. Thirdly, we've got to ensure that we practice what the definition of honesty. Fourthly, we must empower ourselves through our, whether at home, to helping there at home with the needs, with its homework or other housework work, or at work, to ensure that we are properly trained by training ourselves to start with. And therefore I believe that through education in particular, formal education, every opportunity should be exploited, and the necessary pressure put on those with whom we work.
Thank you so much, sir. We've come to the end of the interview. Thank you so much for your time.
Was just very not